are there on board and executing their search based on their requirements if they want to pick up any professional for any independent director vacancy. So,
Okay.
in nutshell, this is there. Then, in terms of a brief about today's program, we conduct power talk, power panel discussions, and CEO dialogue, and try to bring experts so that the tacit knowledge could be transformed from more experienced ones to comparatively less experienced ones to bring everybody on page and to initiate dialogue, discussions, networking, and exchange of the thought leadership. So that's in brief. It's right 4 by my watch. So if you kindly allow, I would like to place before the participants a brief introduction about you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and congratulations for what you're trying to do. So all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the kind words. So, dear friends, let me quickly introduce Mr. Vipin Sondhi. He's the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Ashok Leyland, flagship of the Hinduja Group, and second largest manufacturer of commercial vehicles in India. It's a US dollar 2.9 US billion dollar company as per 2021 statistics. If I talk specifically in terms of Mr. Sondhi, he has more than 3 decades of experience to his credit in manufacturing and engineering based companies such as JCB, Honda, Tata Steel, and Tecumseh. Prior to joining Ashok Leyland, he was heading JCB India for more than a decade and was a member of JCB's global executive team. Mr. Sondhi is an alumnus of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and also Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi. In terms of his honors and accolades which have been conferred upon him, he has been conferred the Economic Times Most Promising Business Leader of Asia in construction equipment industry in 2018-19. He was also conferred with an honorary fellowship by Center for Excellence in Project Management in December 2017. He has been awarded the CEO of the Year Award at CEO India Awards in 2014 and Udyog Rathan Award by Institute of Economic Studies in 2011. Young Managers Trophy by the Confederation of Indian Industries in year 2000 also stands to his credit. If I talk about his other associations, he holds the position of Vice President SIAM, Vice President of Automotive Skill Development Council, and also the Chairman of CII National Committee on Future Mobility and Battery Storage, and also the Chairman of CII's National Committee on Research and Development and Innovation. Friends, we all understand that ESG is at the center stage, specifically as a significant opportunity for the Indian companies to address to the best practice which is emerging globally and of course backed by the actions of institutional investors. The entire board is ideally expected to focus on this, and specifically independent directors as a key institution of good governance has a significant role to play in this direction. I would invite Mr. Sondhi for his deliberations on the aspect and how he sees it as an aerial view as a chief of a big company of the country. So over to you, Mr. Sondhi, and a warm welcome again.
Thank you very much, Professor Gupta, and you've been very generous with the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I have a presentation which a colleague of mine who's on the call can project with your permission, and I will then go through with it.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Vijay, you'll need to put it on slideshow. Is Professor Gupta, is the slide visible?
Yeah, it's visible, sir. Perfect.
Okay, then I'll start then. Well, namaste, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I take great pleasure in participating in this dialogue series. And thank you, Professor Gupta, to you and your team. Congratulations, and thank you for inviting me. At the outset, I hope everybody is safe and you're well in the process of vaccination, which is so key. And a special thanks, Professor Gupta, to your institution, the Institute of Corporate Affairs, for organizing this session. The topic today is relevant in the context that we've been witnessing the world over all of last year, and a lot has changed since the pandemic hit countries across the globe. Now there's a need more than ever before to make sure that our businesses are sustainable and make our world a better, happier, and healthier place to live in. My name is Vipin Sondhi, as Professor Gupta kindly had introduced, of Ashok, Leyland, and it's a great honor to be amidst all of you today to share my thoughts on the topic of ESG and role of independent directors. And we are also relatively new to this, so I learn, I'm sure, a lot as we go along. My presentation will cover the following: introduction to ESG, the regulatory framework, what the board should know, questions that independent directors need to ask, and of course, some closing remarks, and then we'll try and interact together. Degradation of planet Earth and planet health now. The health of ecosystems on which we and other species depend is deteriorating more rapidly than ever. And the foundation of economies, livelihoods, food security, health and quality of life worldwide is, as we all know, eroding away. And we need to act, and we need to act fast, and we need to act now. Societies are becoming unequal, and inequality will have its toll on society. Less stable economies, higher crime rates, mental stress, lower levels of happiness could be outcomes of unequal societies. So a resilient growth model, companies that succeed have a culture of sustainability to be successful. And good ESG actions are key to becoming a successful business for tomorrow. And a company's sustainable action will build resilience and enable growth to occur. Now, ESG is environmental, social, and governance. All of you know that. A set of standards for a company's operations that socially conscious investors use to screen potential investments. And the environment criteria considers how a company performs as a steward of nature. The social criteria examines how it manages relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and communities where it operates. And the governance deals with a company's leadership, audits, internal controls, and shareholder rights. You would recall that the triple bottom line concept was created, it was created by a British management consultant in 1994. And the triple bottom line since then has gained a lot of prominence. It was to measure financial, social, and environmental performance of a company over a period of time. TBL, as triple bottom line is known, consists of, as you can see on the slide, profit, people, and planet. And the TBL theory holds that if a firm looks at its profits only, ignoring people and planet, it cannot account for the full cost of doing business. TBL in economics highlights that companies should commit to focusing as much on social and environmental concerns as they do on profits. And the theory also said that instead of one bottom line, there are three bottom lines. Again, people, planet, profit. And TBL seeks to gauge a corporation's level of commitment to corporate social responsibility and its impact on the environment over a period of time. Now, the World Economic Forum recommends that each company apply its own view of dynamic materiality, reporting on what is deemed material to its business and its stakeholders. And the metrics are centered on the four pillars that we see on the slide. The principles of governance, that really is the company's purpose, the strategy, the accountability. And this pillar includes criteria measuring risk and ethical behavior. Planet, the company's dependence, and all of us are dependent on the environment, but sometimes we take it for granted. So metrics in this pillar include greenhouse gas emissions, land protection, water use. And people, the company's equity and its treatment of employees. And these metrics include diversity, reporting, wage gaps, health, safety. Prosperity is how a company affects the financial well-being of its community. Metrics include employment, wealth generation, taxes paid, and research and development expenses. So the concern over ESG risks is growing. And again, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Survey 2021 said that 4 out of 5 risks in terms of likelihood are related to the environment. And we all know about that. And a sea change is in the way investors now evaluate company is underway. The exact timing can't be predicted, but it's inevitable. And investors are increasingly recognizing the importance of sustainability for risk management and business opportunities. And companies need to take actions to prepare for the era of sustainable investing. And obviously, all of us are reading more and more about it. First, important to articulate purpose. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. And that's the cornerstone of constructive engagement with investors and stakeholders. The second is to improve stakeholder engagement. That's an integrated report, concise communication about how an organization's strategy, governance, performance, prospects in the context of the external environment lead to the creation of value. The statement of purpose and an integrated report provides a good foundation for a company to start communicating its long-term plans. Third, the increased involvement of middle management and real change, and we all know it, all of you have been part of organizations. When businesses are focused on what ESG means for their own purpose and innovation, middle management in business units should also participate. In fact, everybody must participate in ESG. Identify the issues that impact the business. And getting middle management more involved is the responsibility of the board and also, obviously, of the senior leaders. Improving measurement and reporting. The challenge for companies wishing to attract these investors is that there is currently no agreed upon way of measuring a firm's externalities. It's difficult. The positive effects, the negative effects of its products and services on society. Hence, more the disclosure using appropriate measurement criteria, the better the rating. So if we were to set a context for ESG, E, environment. The environment criteria includes the energy the company takes in and the waste it discharges, the resources it needs, the consequences of living beings as a result. And not the least, E encompasses carbon emissions, climate change, and a lot of conversation is taking place around that around the world. And every company uses energy and resources. Every company affects it, but it's also affected by the environment. S, the social criteria. The social criteria addresses the relationships, examines how it manages relationships with employees, with suppliers, and generally the communities where we do business. So S includes labor relations, diversity, and inclusion, and every company operates within a broader, diverse society. G, governance. This is the internal system, and you know it much better than I. The internal system of practices, controls, procedures a company adopts in order to govern itself, make effective decisions, comply with the law, meet the needs of external stakeholders. Every company, which is itself a legal creation, requires governance. So MSCI's ESG universe. So MSCI, as you know, was formerly Morgan Stanley Capital International. That's a leading firm that provides the global investment community with innovative products and services that power better investment decisions. And the ESG universe clearly maps the width, the depth of various material aspects surrounding each one of them. And organizations embarking on the ESG journey can suitably pick the relevant materiality aspect from the list and define the metrics. So what do investors look for? They're looking for disclosures on climate change. Investors want to see that companies have deeply considered the specific impacts of climate change on the business, by the business. Dealing with the S of ESG, Investors are now paying ever closer attention on how companies deal with the S of ESG, particularly as the pandemic and the socio-political environment has thrown societal issues into sharp focus. Emphasis on materiality. Investors are increasingly gravitating towards frameworks that emphasize the materiality focus. Transparency, consistency, and assurance. They want to know how a figure was calculated. That's transparency. Consistency, they want to know the calculation method so that it remains constant over a period of time. And wherever possible, and when the method has to change, they want an explanation and a reconciliation to the previous method. So that's holding organizations accountable. And assurance. They want disclosures that are material to the decision making to be assured, or at least reconciled back to a disclosure that is subject to assurance. So when we look at the convergence in ESG reporting frameworks, investors see greater convergence and standardization in ESG reporting frameworks to be natural endpoint of greater integrations. And companies that today not only keep track of their ratings across various agencies, but they also want to get themselves rated. So the compliance landscape of ESG. The key reporting frameworks, and you're probably familiar with many of these frameworks, and there's no single way to report. The best solution will differ from one business to another. The decision on which framework to report should ultimately come down to the questions of materiality, relevance, which can be assessed in the first instance by considering the intended audience. The audience could be investors, they could be boards, they could be insurers, they could be creditors, they could be employees. What will they ask? What is the information required, etc. And some of the reporting frameworks are listed in this slide. I won't go through them, but you would be very, very familiar. The last one, for example, is universally known, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, they're a collection of 17 global goals, interlinked global goals, designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and a more sustainable future for all by 2030. So going a little deeper into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these are also called global goals. These were adopted by the United Nations, as you would know, in 2015 to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The 17 SDGs, as you can see, they are integrated. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in other areas, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Countries have committed to prioritize progress for those who are furthest behind. The SDGs are designed, and rightly so, to end poverty, hunger, AIDS, discrimination against women and girls. And the creativity somehow, technology and financial resources from all of society is necessary to achieve the SDGs in every context. And all of us have a role to play. So the integrated reporting framework. So an integrated report aims to show, and this report, if you see, aims to show how a business or an organization creates value in different ways over time through both quantitative and qualitative information. It does this through applying the 6 capitals framework. Financial capital is the common thread that binds all the 6 capitals together. easiest to measure, manufactured, physical goods that are produced by humans, that are available to an organization to produce goods, service, buildings, equipment, infrastructure, intellectual, tangible organizational or industry knowledge, including intellectual property. That would be copyrights, patents, software, rights, licenses. Human, ultimately staff, but more specifically competencies, capabilities, and experience. Social and relationship. The social and relationship capital is actually absolutely integral to business development and will have a huge bearing on customer base. And finally, natural. All the renewable, non-renewable environmental resources and processes that provide goods or services which support the prosperity of an organization. So that is the integrated reporting framework. Now, India has traveled a long way since the concept of CSR was brought in 2009 to business responsibility and sustainability. And all of you know that very well. The report in 2020 in the ESG reporting ecosystem. The business responsibility and sustainability report, the BRSR, as well, I learned several months ago, but not very long ago, which is from an ESG perspective, is intended to enable businesses to engage more meaningfully with the stakeholders. It will encourage businesses to go beyond the regulatory financial compliance and report on social and environmental aspects. The BRSR will become applicable to the top 1,000 listed entities by market capitalization for reporting on a voluntary basis for FY 2021-22 and on a mandatory basis from FY 2022-23. Sustainability reporting. It is the disclosure and communication of environmental, social, and governance goals, as well as a company's progress towards them. And the benefits of sustainability reporting include improved corporate reputation, building consumer confidence, increased innovation, and even improvement of risk management. BRSR allows interoperability of reporting with international frameworks, the other international frameworks that we mentioned, which is GRI, SASB, and IR, etc. The BRSR has the following contents, and it's just really to mention. Section A is general company information, B is financial information, C is other details, D is business responsibility information, and E is principle-wise performance. And businesses should, principle 1, conduct and govern themselves with ethics, transparency, and accountability. 2, provide goods and services that are safe, contribute to sustainability through their life cycle. 3, promote the well-being of all employees. 4, respect the interests of and be responsive towards all stakeholders, especially those who are disadvantaged, vulnerable, marginalized. 5, respect and promote human rights. 6, respect, protect, and make efforts to restore the environment. 7, when engaged in influencing public and regulatory policy, should do so in a responsible manner. 8, support inclusive growth and equitable development. And 9, engage with and provide value to customers and consumers in a responsible manner. Now, Pricewaterhouse, PwC, Coopers, they did a survey, and an extract is presented for you. This was in September 2020. 67% of the respondents thought that climate change should have a role in strategy formulation. Only 50% felt that their board fully understands the impact of ESG. I think this is a fairly large number. Even 50%, I think, would be a large number. 38% think ESG issues have a financial impact on the organization. And 45% say that ESG issues are a part of regular board agenda, up from 34% in 2019. And I'm sure this number will keep going up. So questions that the board may want to consider. And this is a excerpts from Deloitte publication, The Frontline of ESG Disclosure, the board's role, which will give us some insights on the question that boards may ask on ESG. 1. Do we have a specific committee with the capacity, interest, and skills to take the lead on overseeing the company's overall ESG effort? If not, will the full board take on the responsibility, or should we create a new committee? 2. Have we considered how the committees will stay aligned on ESG considerations? Have committee charters and proxy disclosures been updated to transparently disclose to shareholders and other shareholders the board's allocation of ESG oversight responsibility? 3. Does the board understand the risks and opportunities for the business with respect to sustainability? Is there an understanding of how those risks and opportunities impact the company's strategy? Is ESG integrated into the company's enterprise risk management activities? And 4, who within the company is responsible for ESG management and performance disclosure, and what is the internal governance structure? How does the company identify ESG issues that are material and collect data that supports high quality disclosure? 5, does the company understand what types of disclosures its largest investors and other stakeholders seek, and how does the company and the board respond? Is there an established and compelling sustainability narrative that the company uses to tell its story? 6, if the company currently reports on ESG matters, how often is the form and content of that reporting revisited to assess changes and modifications to reflect current trends? 7, is sustainability the responsibility of the full board, or is it delegated to one or more committees? What role could the audit committee play in reviewing and assessing the disclosure of material ESG matters? How often does the board receive updates on sustainability performance, and through what form? So what the board should get right on ESG. And the following steps is, in our opinion, what the board should get right. Integration with business strategy. Assessment of material topics that matter most to the organization. Formulating an ESG vision and roadmap. Defining KPIs for monitoring performance. Stakeholder engagement inside out. Reporting of performance against KPIs. Monitoring systems and controls, and integration of stakeholders in the company's ESG journey. What are the key challenges for directors, such as all of you? Must understand the risk profile of the company. Directors need to ensure reduction to the risk impact to the organization. Board should consider sustainability during implementation of business strategy. Board should consider risk of damage of reputation if stakeholder expectations, both internal and external, are not met. Reputation is an indispensable asset. The board should evaluate publicly committing to sustainable goals through adoption of various frameworks and standards. Transparency is the new normal. Should be diligent in execution of their fiduciary responsibilities or duties which promote good governance. And the last, the risk of litigation on account of breach of regulation or incorrect reporting of what the company is or is not doing. So the W's, why? Compliance, sustainability goals, communication with stakeholders, participate in ratings, ranking, and indices. Whom? Investors, suppliers, customers, regulators, NGOs, etc. Where? An integrated report, sustainability report, voluntary disclosures, investor presentations. What? ESG risks and opportunities, strategic goals, targets, performance. And how? Through a reporting framework selected by the organization. And then, of course, you've got many options like the GRI, IR, SASP, etc. So as I mentioned in Ashok Leyland, while we were doing a lot of this, we've recently set up a board committee, and we firmly believe that the success of the business is inextricably linked to that of our stakeholders. And Ashok Leyland has been around for over 7 decades. We worked towards, as far as we could, for the good of our customers, employees, communities, value chain partners, and investors. And in these trying times, that's no exception. And we remain committed to that. Now, sustainability is the foundation on which this commitment will continue to be built at Ashok Leyland. And in order to bring in a singular focus across the various sustainability initiatives going beyond CSR, we only recently carved out an ESG committee of the board. We were studying this for a few months, and when the SEBI chairman had invited the top publicly listed companies, I had the pleasure of being part of that, and that's when the whole seriousness came in. I think this was about 6 or 7 months ago, and that's how we worked towards setting up this committee. It's headed by an independent director with tremendous international experience, and that happened only a fortnight ago. So the role of this board committee will be to provide appropriate oversight and guidance in the company's journey on organization-wide ESG initiatives, priorities, leading ESG practices. So we are also really commencing ourselves on a structured journey. Before I finish, I'd like to thank my colleagues, TV Venkatraman. I'd like to thank Vijay and Pooja, who've helped put all of this together for me. Thank you and namaste. Back to you, Professor Gupta. Sorry, I'm not sure if Professor Gupta is there. I'm happy to take any questions if you have, and I have my colleagues with me as well.
That's a great listening to you, Mr. Sodhi, and it was really very insightful, presentation as well as deliberation. Friends, can we have questions, please? We can go one by one. Hello. Can we have the questions of the participants?
So there is a question. Let me just read for your benefit by Mr. Chandru. How's the climate change affecting the business risks and business opportunities of Ashok Leyland?
Well, I won't limit it to Ashok Leyland. When you look at the automotive industry as a whole, the automotive industry is in many ways a very, despised industry. All of us use automobiles, but in a sense, you do find that, let's say pollution, for example, because of the constant burning of fossil fuels is a cause which all of us are aware of. And that causes a huge amount of concern, especially to citizens. So what is climate change then impacting, and what is, let's say, India doing, and a lot of the world is doing? The government of India and automotive companies are more and more moving towards electric vehicles. And you can see that, reading about it at least, you can read about it almost every day. Starting with two-wheelers, buses, we make electric buses as well. But these will only gain in prominence as we go forward. The next thing will be the use of hydrogen. As soon as hydrogen becomes viable, hydrogen is an unstable gas in that sense. So we've got to make sure that it's safe. But how do you actually have large trucks moving on hydrogen? That would be a more sustainable way for automobile companies to define their own future and be integrated with society.
Okay, Thank you so much, sir. There is another question by Ms. Vasudha. She wants to share your experiences as to how much is the focus of the companies on sustainable development goals, uh, and how's your experience when we compare India as a developing nation with the developed countries?
Yeah, we are a great country and we have challenges. We might call ourselves as developing or emerging or whatever, but we certainly are very conscious about what is good for society. Now, we often don't implement it as well as we might, and that applies equally to government, equally to corporates, but equally to citizens as well. So the UN sustainable goals, of course, talked about poverty, hunger, rights of women and children, equal rights for women and children. And you know that there is a gap. There is a lot of work that we have to do together to achieve these goals. So I would just say that we as citizens, as corporates, have to continue this journey and each one do our bit to make sure that we are doing it. Yourselves as directors, as independent directors, need to hold all of us who are running corporates accountable for each one of these parameters. And I think the ESG framework will help you to be able to at least have a measurement system of where the company is and where the company is moving year on year. Otherwise, you hold the management accountable.
Okay. There's another question, sir, where the participant wants to know, uh, are companies considering ESG as a subset of risk management and referring to the ESG aspects in or addressing to the ESG aspects in risk management committee as well?
That's an interesting question. And since I have my colleague, Mr. Venkatraman, who heads internal audit risk and has played a role, if he can hear, be very happy if he answers this question and I just supplement it. TVV, are you there?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, so coming to the question, which is ESG a subset of risk management? I think fundamentally, the elements of environment and social, when they look at the materiality aspects around what impacts the company the most, from that angle, the risk management definitely has a role to play in terms of assessment of the materiality components. But ESG cannot be treated as a subset of risk management. In fact, it goes over and above risk management to look at holistically all the sustainability initiatives of the organization, including developing metrics, and the governance component resides across the board and the company to evaluate how the company is faring in terms of ESG disclosures and the reporting frameworks that the company uses. So the short answer is ESG is not a subset of risk management, but they do have a lot of interface between one another.
Thank you, TVV.
Okay. Great. So there is another question I'd like to place before you. There could be companies who might be thinking, or the boards might be thinking to have ESG as a key focus area. So what are the initial steps which are necessary to be taken by the leadership for developing ESG consciousness in the company?
That's very interesting. All of us, actually all companies in our natural course have work for the environment. The minimum is that we plant trees and we try and create a positive water balance. All of us have some form of CSR activity where we work with the communities around us, and all of us have a board and we have an audit committee, we have a risk committee, and we have a variety of governance mechanisms. The question really is that is there a framework that can help you measure the progress? Are there parameters with which you can measure progress? And that is how, from an external standpoint, investors said, how do we know what rating does a company have on each of these parameters? What is the criteria, etc.? And that's how, let's say, the Morgan Stanley index was set up. And there are many others as we saw. So the whole thing is being able to measure and being able to take actions that will keep improving the measurement score, and external and internal, because young people are very demanding and so great. They're demanding on the fact that what is the purpose? How much damage are you doing to environment, or how much are you contributing to environment? They may even choose to join companies in the future which have a high ESG rating. So it's extremely critical that that we do it. Now, how do you go on this journey? Adopt a framework, because if we don't measure, we don't know. So adopt one of the frameworks and see where we are at present on that framework, and then chart a way forward going from there.
Great. So there is a question. Of course, we keep finding a lot of interest of global, institutional investors looking at the ESG ratings or ESG status of the company for, choosing companies to invest. But how's your experience in terms of Indian institutional investors or the banks looking at this aspect while, funding the companies?
I think early days, it's a very good question. It's a very, very good question. I think this has started with global investors. It's gained prominence, I would say, in the last 18 months or so. SEBI has still come up with a voluntary framework, as I mentioned, and mandatory from next year. So really, the interest has only now started. What will happen is that it will go forward suddenly in a very fast pace. So it's better to get engaged with it now than maybe 2 years or 3 years later.
Okay, great. Sir, another question, like ESG is to be, of course, it has gained prominence recently, and there is much to be done on part of companies, of course, regulators, as you have mentioned and showed the journey over a period of time in ESG ecosystem, are also fastening their belts to create awareness and also bring, the governance professionals and companies on track to have a focus on this. But taking it as a mission, how do you see, like, going beyond board, maybe one level, like at the C-suite level and in the entire chain? So how can, HR and other verticals could contribute in percolating this message down to the last mile person, having consciousness, and for generating ideas and taking innovative steps in aligning the each and every component of the value chain towards ESG?
A very good question, really. One is ESG, or environment social governance, is everybody, each individual person's job. So when you say, how do you take it down to the last person, it's a very valid thing, because each one of us, in whatever little we do, can multiply into a massive effort for the community and for ourselves. So the question then is, how do you percolate it down and how do you engage? And that's really the senior leadership's job. It is my job. It is very important that the communication, and then repeated communication, and then ensuring that we set up a mechanism where each one of the senior leaders are held accountable, and only then can we hold our colleagues accountable, going down to the last person. And with that, you cascade the goals down. Now, all of us in corporates, we have something called KRAs, key result areas. You start with the CEO, maybe he has 5 KRAs, and then it translates to the next person. Next person ultimately goes down, let's do it to the production person, who actually has to manufacture to a certain quality standard or to a certain number of days. You put in the KRA itself as a measurement, which comes from obviously the CEO's KRA, right down to what is expected of the last person. And it could be the greening, it could be the quantum of water used last year vis-a-vis the quantum of water used this year in the paint shop, for example. Even if we save 100 liters a day, That would be wonderful. So that then becomes accountable to the last person in what he or she is performing in his or her work area.
Great. Another just related question which I would like to add, there are so many criterias which we choose to have while focusing or taking decisions on succession planning or talent management or talent identification. Has so far at your company or with your experience at other companies, ESG has started being used as one of the criterias for selection of key managerial personnel?
Not yet. So when you hire somebody for CSR, yes, you'd ask that person. But if you are hiring a sales and marketing person, the answer is no. But the answer will be yes going forward, because it's going to come into the key result area of that person. And the moment it becomes part of the KRA of each and every individual, it becomes a talking point for job description. And actually talent joining organizations will also ask what will be their expectations from the organization. So going forward, the answer is yes. At best, you'd ask the head of manufacturing in the past as to whether they were conscious about the greening of factories or the use of water or the use of noxious gases, etc. But no, it's a very valid question. Not really across the organization for talent, but it will start now. And now that you've said it, I've definitely made a point of it myself.
Thank you, sir. There is another question, sir. Especially after introduction of Companies Act 2013 and specifically with Section 135, as you were referring to the CSR aspects as well. So still, we believe that the CSR ecosystem and the way it is practiced and ideally should be practiced in not just in letter but in spirit is evolving. And now the introduction of a new challenge or opportunity, whatever we say, in terms of ESG. So don't you think things need to be aligned and CSR itself, in terms of its core idea, contributes to the ESG risk?
Oh, absolutely. And the alignment has to be there. There is no doubt about it. So for very long, we thought about, we have a CSR committee at the board. And for very long, we thought about, we've got the governance committees. And we thought, how do we integrate, or should we have a separate focused committee? And we decided to have a separate focused committee with the head of CSR, let's say the board member who heads the CSR committee being part of the ESG committee. So the alignment takes place automatically as the membership of the ESG committee is formed and must have, let's say, the board member in charge of CSR or the head of CSR being part of the ESG committee.
Great, sir. So there is another question. There are always, for any industry, there are two aspects which are important: the supply aspect, the supply side, and the demand aspect, the demand side. So how do you see the practices of companies on ESG focusing the demand aspect, like having consumers at the focus, maybe using design thinking or other methods for performing high on ESG?
Okay. So on the supply side, of course, you haven't asked that question, but let me try and answer on the supply side first, and then I'll come to the demand side, and especially in a manufacturing organization, which is a hardcore manufacturing, heavy engineering manufacturing organization like ours. The question is that when we look at our vendor base or a supplier base, what are the criteria? And we'll start looking at them more and more now. What is the criteria by which we do the selection, and is ESG a significant part of that criteria or not? If not, then we would be concerned. Are labor practices fair in the vendor base? Now, we can't know it, but we can audit it. But if they participate with an ESG framework, then it becomes easier for us to measure and then decide whether we should at all work with them as a vendor or not. when you look at the demand side first is to do with our own products. If our own products do not comply, one, basically with the law of the land, but more than that, if we are not future thinking in terms of the alternative energy that we are going to use, we'll be out of the market anyway. But can we think 8 or 10 years ahead and try and bring that future forward in terms of using renewable energy? Do our dealers practice that? So this whole value chain is going to come in, and I believe the framework of SEBI BRSR will look at not much more than just the company itself. I think it's going to look a bit at the demand side and the supply side as well. So we will be accountable for that.
Great. Sir, if of course I understand, and I'm sure we all have similar appreciations towards BRSR, which is nothing but based on the 9 key principles of national guidelines on responsible business conduct, having a very holistic coverage, right from environment, sustainability, human rights, and so on and so forth. But what had been your experiences? Like even BRR was not a full-blown exercise, and now this year is a preparatory time. BRSR would be mandatory from 22-23.
Yeah.
So how do you see mid-cap companies and small-cap companies picking up on the ESG frontier when BRSR is not going to be mandatory for them?
Yeah, but everybody knows that over a period of time, it will become mandatory. So 2 or 3 things. One is that I think the top 1,000 listed companies are going to be the first that, because of the resources they have, to be the first to come in. And if the mid-cap companies are, in a sense, suppliers to any of these, then they'll automatically, as part of the value chain, be forced to move in that direction. Third is banks. So forget about investors. When you go to borrow money from the State Bank of India or from Canara Bank or some other bank, if you're a mid-cap company and you're asked what your ESG score is, you better shape up if you want the money. So there is the whole ecosystem can be used to put a positive pressure on organizations, because everybody at some stage needs finances and needs to go. I just thought of a bank that can actually ask for an ESG rating and ask for a progress in that ESG rating if further funds are to be supplied. I think we'll all fall in line in a positive way.
Great. Shifting a bit, sir, from BRSR, and you referred in terms of integrated reporting and other GRI, one of the oldest ones. So, what do you feel like in terms of a structured reporting mechanism? Of course, BRSR is going to be there for 1,000 companies from next year. So, what other most popular frameworks you would like to recommend where the directors could learn and focus on?
Okay, no, I'm not familiar too much. Let me see if TVV, again, let me call upon my colleague if he'd like to answer that. And I'm not familiar one over the other, but TVV, do you want to respond?
So, I think BRSR also does not prescribe that, it should adhere to only the questions or the disclosures as required under the 9 principles. What BRSR, what the SEBI has come out with is that as long as the disclosures are, being made through any other reporting framework, whether it's the GRI, whether it is the, the UN SDG principles or whatever else, the company may choose to adopt that, but link BRSR to such disclosures. So in a way, what SEBI has come out with is that BRSR need not be replicated in the way it has sought out for, but it can be referenced to the company's internal reporting frameworks, which could be a combination of GRI or UN SDG or any other reporting framework that is there. Having said that, most companies prefer to take the GRI as a starting point, because if you're going on with a ESG program, the GRI gives you industry-specific solutions on which you can base your disclosures. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Sir, just one more question from
Sure.
outside, and I think like I was, and this I'm placing like from my side. Like I've read extensively in terms of the level of awareness and sensitivity or focus of boards on climate risk issues, specifically when OECD, is pursuing this agenda for the last 3-4 years constantly and conducted so many roundtables. Even one of them I was also party to, representing the ministry. So, how do you see, with your experience, that the boards really have, focus on climate risk, while specifically on various strategic, agenda items?
No, I think there are boards and boards and boards. So I really can't comment in general terms. There are enlightened boards, there are less enlightened boards, etc. So it's very difficult to answer that question with a broad brush. What I'm happy is that one, risk was introduced into the governance mechanism at the board level some time ago. CSR was introduced. So it's all coming in phases. And now we have this ESG framework, which then becomes a measurable framework. At the end of the day, you're only as good as you measure. So difficult to answer how they were, but going forward, you know it as, independent board members, potential independent board members, how the progress in your respective boards is being made. And if it's not being made, then it becomes the duty of the independent director to highlight to the chairperson and the managing director that please get on with it.
Okay. Sir, if you allow just one more question, in the interest of the group, we have more than 300 people on board at this moment. So, specifically, India is a country where there is a dominance of family or promoter-driven business enterprises. So, if any one of us join any such board which doesn't have, maybe awareness or practice in terms of having a focus on ESG. So, how easy or difficult is it for an independent director to take lead on such agenda and bring everybody on the board?
So the answer to your question is that's the duty of an independent director. So whether it's easy or difficult, we have to discharge our responsibility as an independent director. The second definitely is it's being made easier by the fact that SEBI is helping out, let's say, on a voluntary basis and on a more permanent basis for the following years. The third is it's also helping that investors are asking this question. So most boards would be looking at it anyway. But if as an independent director, what you think is right is then your duty to insist and hold accountable. Now, it's not very easy, but I've seen perseverance helps, and I wish you all the very best. Don't give that up. It's so important to all of us to ensure that we are accountable, and we give back to the environment, to society, much more than we take from it. Right now, we are just taking away a lot.
So, just if you kindly allow, I could not refrain myself from asking one more question,
Yeah.
specifically in the interest of those who still have to, have an opening. I mean, those who are aspiring directors, because we have a large number and on board in this data bank exercise. So, what mantra would you like to give them so that because they are accomplished professionals in this own area, so how can they get an opportunity to contribute, and how they could maybe polish themselves or place themselves in the entire corporate ecosystem so that they get an opportunity, because they are full of passion, commitment, but yet waiting for their chances?
I don't know how I can answer that. All I can say is those who are committed, those who are passionate, always find somebody who wants them. I don't know what the channels are, etc. That, I mean, the IICA itself is a great institution. I don't know what the channels are for that, but whatever it may be, if you're passionate, if you're committed, if you are enlightened, an enlightened board, that's where you want to be. An enlightened board will certainly find use for you.
Great, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such a patient, response to all our questions. It was great hearing you, and I'm sure the participants must have enjoyed, and it had been a great source of learning. I personally enjoyed today's discussion, as we can see from the chat box, there are a lot of compliments and good feedback on today's deliberation. So thank you so much for sparing your precious time being with us, listening to our questions, and responding them patiently. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure, and namaskar, and of course, stay safe. Thank you very much for inviting me. Great pleasure.
Welcome, sir. Thank you so much. Dear participants, we'll close here with this discussion. I'm sure you must have enjoyed. I tried to pick up the questions from the chat box as much as I could, accommodating within today's schedule. Stay safe. Have a great evening. We'll meet next week, Friday, for the next event. Thank you so much. Bye bye.